The smell of garlic and fresh herbs filled the kitchen as I carefully stirred the marinara sauce. My mother's recipe, perfected over decades. Through the kitchen window, I could see my brother Michael in the parking lot, leaning against his new Mercedes, talking animatedly on his phone. Probably another business meeting that would leave our accounts mysteriously lower. "Order up, table 7, called Jenny, our longest-serving waitress. Her voice snapped me back to the present. "Two linguine à la vongole, coming right up," I replied, turning my attention back to the stove. But my mind kept drifting to the stack of unpaid bills sitting in the office, and the way Michael had brushed off my concerns earlier. My name is Sofia Romano, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was and where I belonged. I was the head chef and co-owner of Romano's, the Italian restaurant my parents had built from nothing after immigrating to America in the 1970s. For 15 years, I'd worked alongside them, learning every recipe, every technique, every secret that made our food special. When they passed away last year, Mom from cancer, Dad from what we all knew was a broken heart just months later, they left the restaurant to both me and my younger brother Michael. It seemed fair at the time. I'd handle the kitchen, he'd handle the books. We preserved their legacy together. What a joke that turned out to be. "Sophia." Jenny's voice cut through my thoughts again. "Table 12 wants to know if you're making the tiramisu fresh tonight." I managed a smile. "Tell Mrs. Peterson she knows I always make it fresh. I'll bring her an extra large portion." Mrs. Peterson had been coming to Romano's every Friday night for 20 years. She was one of the many regulars who made this place more than just a restaurant. It was a community, a family. The thought of letting them down made my chest tight. The kitchen door swung open, and Michael strode in, designer shoes clicking on the tile floor. At 32, he was 5 years younger than me, but carried himself like he owned the world. "Maybe that's what business school does to you. Sophie, we need to talk," he said, his tone making it clear it wasn't a request. "Office now." I gestured at the full stovetop. "Kind of busy here, Michael." "Dinner rush." He rolled his eyes. "Marco can handle it for 5 minutes. This is important." Marco, our sous chef, nodded at me. "Go ahead, chef. I've got this." In the small office that still smelled faintly of Dad's cigars, Michael settled into the leather chair behind the desk. Dad's chair. I remained standing, arms crossed. "We need to make some changes," he began, shuffling through some papers. "The numbers aren't looking good. Maybe because you bought yourself a new car last month?" I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. "With restaurant funds?" He waved his hand dismissively. "Image is important in this business, Sophie. Nobody wants to eat at a place where the owner drives a 10-year-old Honda." "Our food speaks for itself," I replied. "It always has." "Times change," he said, leaning back. "We need to modernize, streamline. I've been talking to some consultants." "More consultants?" I interrupted. "The last ones you hired wanted us to turn the place into some kind of fusion nightmare." Mom would roll in her grave. "Mom's not here anymore," he snapped, then softened his tone. "Look, I know you're attached to the old ways, but trust me on this. I know what I'm doing." The thing was, I didn't trust him. Not since he'd started making changes without consulting me, despite our equal ownership. Not since I'd caught him doctoring the books to hide his personal expenses. Not since he'd started treating our parents' legacy like his personal piggy bank. "Just let me handle the business side," he continued, standing up. "You stick to what you know, the kitchen." As he walked out, leaving behind the scent of expensive cologne, I felt a familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. Something was wrong, really wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Later that night, after the last customer had left and the kitchen was spotless, Mom's first rule: always leave it cleaner than you found it. I sat at the bar going through receipts. The numbers weren't adding up, and not in a small way. "Need a drink?" Marco asked, sliding onto the stool next to me. He'd been with us for 8 years, starting as a dishwasher and working his way up. He was family, just like Jenny and all our longtime staff. I pushed the papers away with a sigh. "Make it a double." As he poured 2 glasses of Montepulciano, I could feel him watching me. "You know something's not right with him," he said finally. "He's my brother," I replied automatically, but the words felt hollow. "He's going to run this place into the ground," Marco said quietly, "and you know it." I did know it. I just didn't want to admit it. The next morning, I arrived early as usual to start the bread and prep for the day, but something felt off. The security code didn't work, and when I used my key, the door was already unlocked. Inside, I found Michael in the office with two men in suits I'd never seen before. "Ah, perfect timing," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "We need to talk." The men turned out to be from some corporate restaurant group. Michael had apparently been in discussions with them for weeks about selling Romanos. Selling? I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "This isn't just your decision to make. I own half this restaurant." Michael's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, if you look at the paperwork carefully, you'll find that's not quite true anymore." He slid a document across the desk. As I read it, my hands started shaking. Somehow, he'd managed to transfer my ownership shares to himself. The signature at the bottom looked like mine, but I knew I'd never signed this. "This is forged," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Prove it," he replied with a shrug. "Besides, it's already done. The sale goes through next week. They're planning to turn it into a modern Italian fusion concept, exactly what this neighborhood needs." I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. "Mom and Dad trusted you. They trusted us to keep their dream alive." "Their dream?" He laughed. "Their dream was small-time Sofia. This is business. Sometimes you have to let go of the past to move forward." I looked at my brother, really looked at him. And for the first time, I saw a stranger. The little boy who used to help me knead bread dough, who cried when he broke Mom's favorite serving platter, who swore he'd always protect our family's legacy. He was gone. "You can't do this," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't true. He could and he had. "It's already done," he replied, standing up. "The new owners want to close for renovations next week. You should start letting the staff know." As he walked out with the suits, leaving me alone in what had been our father's office, I felt something break inside me. But along with the pain came something else, a fierce, burning anger. My phone buzzed. A text from Marco. "Everything okay? You're usually here by now." I looked around the office, at the family photos on the walls, at the ledger where Mom used to meticulously track every penny, at the espresso machine Dad insisted on keeping even though it was ancient. My fingers flew across the phone screen. "Meet me at Carlotta's Cafe in 20 minutes. Bring your recipe book. We need to talk." If Michael thought he could destroy our family's legacy without a fight, he was about to learn how wrong he was. Carlotta's was quiet this early in the morning. Marco was already there when I arrived, his worried expression deepening when he saw my face. "What happened?" he asked as I slid into the booth. I told him everything. The forged documents, the sale, all of it. By the time I finished, his hands were clenched into fists on the table. "He can't get away with this," Marco said, his voice low and angry. "We have to do something." "We will," I replied, pulling out my phone. "But first, I need to make some calls." The first call was to Maria DeLuca, who'd been our family's lawyer since before I was born. The second was to Antonio, my father's oldest friend and the owner of 3 successful restaurants in the city. As I made the calls, a plan began to take shape. Michael might have thought he had all the power, but he'd forgotten something crucial. I wasn't just the chef at Romano's. I was Sofia Romano, daughter of Giuseppe and Elena Romano, and I had my own connections in this community. "Marco," I said, putting down my phone, "how would you feel about taking a risk?" He looked at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. "With you, chef? Any day." The next few days were a blur of meetings and phone calls. Maria discovered that Michael had not only forged my signature on the ownership transfer, but had also taken out several loans against the restaurant without proper authorization. Antonio introduced me to his banker, who was very interested in hearing about certain financial irregularities at Romano's. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Jenny, our waitress, had been keeping a detailed record of every time she'd seen Michael misusing restaurant funds. She had dates, amounts, even photos of receipts. "I knew something wasn't right," she said, handing me a thick folder. "Your parents were good to me for 20 years. I wasn't about to let him destroy what they built." The evidence was damning, but Michael had already set the sale in motion. We needed to move fast. That Friday night, as the dinner service was winding down, I gathered the staff in the kitchen. These people weren't just employees. They were family. Some of them had known me since I was a teenager, learning to cook at my mother's side. I won't lie to you, I said, looking at their worried faces. Things are about to get complicated. Michael has sold the restaurant without my consent, using forged documents. The new owners want to close next week. The kitchen erupted in angry exclamations. I held up my hand for silence. But we're not giving up. I have a plan. It won't be easy, and I can't guarantee anything. But if you're willing to stick with me, I think we can save Romano's. Marco stepped forward first. We're with you, chef. Whatever it takes. One by one, they all nodded. Even Mrs. Peterson, who had overheard everything from her usual table, came into the kitchen to offer her support. Your mother made the best tiramisu in the city, she said, patting my hand. We can't let that corporate nonsense take over. As I looked around at these people who had become my second family, I felt stronger. Michael might have the paperwork on his side, but I had something more valuable: loyalty, community, and the determination to fight for what was right. The next morning, I arrived at the restaurant early again. This time, Michael was waiting for me. The staff needs to be out by Wednesday, he said without preamble. The new owners want to start renovations immediately. I met his gaze steadily. No. He blinked, thrown off by my calm defiance. What do you mean, no? This isn't a negotiation, Sophie. It's done. Actually, I replied, pulling out my phone, it's not. You might want to check your email. Maria DeLuca sent some interesting documents to your lawyer this morning. His face paled slightly. Maria has nothing to do with this anymore. I hired new lawyers. She's still the executor of Mom and Dad's estate, I said. And she's very interested in how you managed to transfer my shares without my knowledge. The bank is interested too, especially in those loans you took out. Michael's composure cracked. You're bluffing. You can't prove anything. I pulled out Jenny's folder and placed it on the counter between us. Want to bet? As he flipped through the pages, I could see the realization dawning on his face. Every unauthorized expenditure, every doctored receipt, every misused fund, it was all there, meticulously documented. This doesn't change anything, he said, but his voice wavered. The sale is already in progress. The sale is based on fraudulent documents, I replied. Would the buyers still be interested if they knew that? Or should we ask them? For the first time since this all began, I saw fear in my brother's eyes. What do you want? He asked quietly. I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment to lay all my cards on the table. I want Romano's back, I said firmly. All of it, and I want you gone. Michael stared at me across the counter, his face a mixture of anger and disbelief. You can't be serious, he said. You have no idea how to run this business without me. I almost laughed. Really? I've been running this restaurant since I was 22. The only thing you've been running is our bank account into the ground. He ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair, his composure cracking. The buyers have a contract. They'll sue. A contract based on forged documents, I reminded him. Maria's already preparing the paperwork to challenge it. How do you think that lawsuit would go, Michael? Want to explain to a judge how you faked my signature? The kitchen door swung open, and Maria walked in, her high heels clicking on the tile floor. Even at 70, she commanded attention the moment she entered a room. Perfect timing, she said, setting her briefcase on the counter. I'd just come from a very interesting meeting with the bank. Michael's face went pale. You had no right. Actually, I had every right, Maria cut him off. As executor of your parents' estate and the restaurant's legal counsel, I had not only the right but the obligation to investigate potential fraud. She pulled out a stack of documents and laid them on the counter. Would you like to explain these loan applications, Michael? The ones with Sophia's forged signature? Or should we discuss the creative accounting you've been doing with the restaurant's funds? I watched my brother's confident facade crumble. He looked suddenly younger, more like the little boy who used to get caught stealing cookies from Mom's kitchen. I was going to pay it all back, he said weakly, once the sale went through. The sale isn't going through, I interrupted. You have two choices, Michael. Sign over your shares to me voluntarily or we take this to court. Either way, you're done here. He looked between me and Maria, probably calculating his odds. Finally, his shoulders slumped. Fine, he muttered. What do you want me to sign? Maria efficiently laid out the paperwork, transfer of ownership documents, resignation from the board, and a formal acknowledgement of his misuse of funds. This agreement keeps things private, she explained as Michael read through the papers. no criminal charges, no public scandal. But in return, you relinquish all claims to Romano's and agree to pay back what you've taken. With what money? He scoffed. Sell the Mercedes, I suggested, and maybe that Rolex you bought with the restaurant's emergency fund. As he signed the papers, his hand trembling slightly, I felt no satisfaction, only sadness. This was my brother, my only family left, and somehow we ended up here. One more thing, I said as he stood to leave. I want Mom's recipe book. The real one, not the copy in the kitchen. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a worn leather-bound notebook. Mom's handwriting filled every page, along with little notes and adjustments she'd made over the years. He'd taken it from her office the day after the funeral. It wouldn't have helped them anyway, he said, sliding it across the counter. They were planning to use frozen pasta and pre-made sauces. I clutched the notebook to my chest, feeling tears prick at my eyes. Get out, Michael. Don't come back. After he left, Maria put a gentle hand on my shoulder. Your parents would be proud of you, Sofia. You protected their legacy. Did I? I asked softly, by pushing away my only brother. Michael made his choices, she replied firmly. You protected something bigger than family ties. You protected your parents' dream and the community they built here. She was right, but it still hurt. However, I didn't have time to dwell on it. I had a restaurant to save. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The bank worked with me to restructure the loans Michael had taken out. Antonio introduced me to suppliers who offered better rates than the overpriced ones Michael had been using. The staff worked overtime to help get everything back on track. Word spread quickly in our tight-knit community about what had happened. Instead of driving customers away, it brought them in. People came not just for the food, but to show their support. Your mother made my wedding cake 20 years ago, one woman told me, squeezing my hand. I'm so glad her recipes are staying in the family. Marco stepped up as my new sous chef, bringing fresh energy to the kitchen while respecting our traditional recipes. Jenny took over as floor manager, her years of experience proving invaluable. 1 month after Michael left, we hosted a special dinner to celebrate Romano's renewal. The place was packed with longtime customers, local business owners, and even some food critics who'd heard about our story. As I worked in the kitchen that night, every dish that went out felt like a tribute to my parents. The marinara sauce, simmering just the way Mom taught me. The fresh pasta rolled to Dad's exacting specifications. The tiramisu made with the extra touch of love that turned good food into something unforgettable. Mrs. Peterson sat at her usual table, beaming as she tasted her dessert. Just like Elena used to make, she said, wiping away a tear. Maybe even better. Late that night, after the last customer had left and the kitchen was clean, I sat at the bar with Marco and Jenny, sharing a bottle of wine. To Romano's, Jenny proposed, raising her glass. And to Sofia, for saving it. To all of us, I corrected her. We did this together. Marco nodded toward the kitchen. What's next, chef? Any changes planned? I thought about it, running my fingers over Mom's recipe book. Some things will never change. The recipes, the quality, the heart we put into every dish. But maybe it's time to expand the catering business like Mom always wanted to, and the cooking classes Dad used to talk about. The Sunday family-style dinners were always popular, Jenny suggested. We could bring those back. As we talked about the future, I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the wine. This was what Michael had never understood. Romano's wasn't just a business to be bought and sold. It was a family, a community, a living legacy. 6 months later, Romano's was thriving. We paid off Michael's debts, expanded our catering service, and started a successful cooking class program. Every Sunday, the restaurant was packed with families sharing enormous platters of pasta and creating memories around our tables. I hadn't heard from Michael since he left. Through the grapevine, I learned he'd moved to another state, trying to start some new business venture. Part of me hoped he found whatever he was looking for, but a bigger part was grateful for the peace his absence brought. One quiet afternoon, as I was testing a new recipe in the kitchen, Marco called me to the dining room. A young couple was waiting to speak with me. We're getting married next month, the woman explained, and we've heard such wonderful things about your catering. But more than that, both our parents had their first dates here. We grew up coming to Romano's. It would mean so much to have you be part of our wedding. As I sat with them, discussing menu options and family traditions, I thought about my parents. They had started Romano's not just to make money, but to create a place where memories were made, where food brought people together, where every customer felt like family. That evening, I added a new note to Mom's recipe book, something she used to say but I'd only now truly understood. The secret ingredient isn't in the sauce. It's in the love you put into making it and the joy of sharing it with others. Michael had tried to sell that legacy for quick profit, but some things can't be bought or sold. They can only be preserved, nurtured, and passed on with love. As I watched the sunset through the restaurant windows, the kitchen humming with preparation for dinner service, I felt at peace. Romano's wasn't just surviving. It was growing stronger, its roots reaching deeper into the community with each passing day. The door chimed as our first customers of the evening arrived, a family celebrating their grandmother's birthday. I smiled, picked up some menus, and went to welcome them home. Because that's what Romano's was, a home. Not just for me, but for everyone who walked through its doors. And that was worth fighting for.